Hey guys, so I want to talk about the Bryan Kohberger case and how it makes people so angry. um, I won't say that I get angry over it. I don't get angry. I get passionate about it, but I'm not particularly angry at anybody. But I do notice that there are hateful comments that go back and forth sometimes um, among different groups of people. And I just wanted to kind of talk about that because I think it's kind of strange. So, the reason I think it's strange is this: people have different perspectives on things, on lots of things. It's only certain times that when those perspectives clash, that it causes this type of division. These things happen over immigration, they happen over who you're going to vote for in politics, it happens over. Um, what's the stance on abortion, like these kind of things, right? We know that these are all very divisive issues that cause people to want to basically tear each other's hair out because one side feels so firmly and strongly that they are correct and the other side is wrong. So this is a court case, right? Like, this is a murder trial where 4 people lost their lives in a horrific way. And so what is it about? I think I'm still playing the music, guys. Oh my gosh, sorry. I just realized that. What is it about this case? I'm not saying it's the only case. We know Karen Reed trial was like this. Is like that. It might be worse, actually. Delphi case was like that. And I can't think of any others in recent history, but those 2 cases, right? And then now I'm going to say Bryan Cope, this case too. And so obviously there's something about these cases, and probably the same something, that causes this division. I'm just wondering if there wasn't such a strong presence here on YouTube, and even to a certain extent on Twitter, would there be this many bloodthirsty people out there that just wanted to put Bryan up against a firing squad? Like, would these people be this vocal about their decision and their judgment against Bryan Kohberger and what his punishment should be? I'm going to say yes. There are still going to be people out there that would spend their time and their days posting and writing about this. There are, for whatever personal reason it may have for them. But the people that are sort of coming online and critiquing anyone who is not just falling in line with the state propaganda, which is Bryan Kohberger did this and deserves to die, those people, they wouldn't be here, right? So when those people show up, then that there's probably an issue here. Because I can understand wanting to set the record straight and fact check and things like that. I'm all for that. I like to be accurate in what I'm speaking on. I like to have informed opinions about things and not just shoot from the hip and go with my first instinct, because oftentimes it can be, I found it to be wrong. And by simply being quiet and watching and listening and everything, you can gain a lot. But it's been 2 years with this case, right? And this case captured my attention from the beginning. Not only because it was horrific, but the secrecy from the jump. From the jump, this case was secret. Remember, we just knew that 4 college kids died on a campus, but we didn't know how for the first day. Not until the next day did they tell us. We didn't even know how, remember? People were like, I wonder if it was a drug overdose. I wonder, if it was murder-suicide. I wonder if it was a suicide pact. I mean, those were the questions for a solid day. Remember, was it like a week before Moscow Police Department came out and made a statement or something like that? It was something crazy. I don't know if it was 2 days, 3 days, whatever it was. It wasn't that night. It wasn't that night, right? So from the jump in this case, it has been secret. That's the first red flag. That is the first red flag. Yes, I know the public does not get to see every single little thing. However, this case, if you go and look at how many documents and hearings, etc., have been sealed in this case, it is a very high percentage. And so there's clearly some big secret here, and it's not the DNA. And that is going to cause people to question things. And thank God it does. Thank God that not everybody just says, okay, whatever. I'm sure they got the right guy. I really see what it means now to have the full weight of the government and all of its resources working against you, and how burdensome that is. I mean, how burdensome that must feel, if especially if you're innocent, especially if you're innocent. And I've kind of maintained neutrality here with Bryan Kohberger, but the more I read about this stuff, the more I believe he's just as innocent as anybody else. In other words, as anybody else could possibly be innocent, so is he. And so why is it he's in that jail cell right now? And the more I read about what this case has done and how they got him cornered, the more frightened I am for the future of technology and how it will be utilized against American citizens. This case is a big deal for that reason, because of the DNA. It's the only thing that matters in this case. Without it, I don't care what they say. They don't have any proof he was there. And so when you start really looking at this DNA, which is the thing that matters the most, is understanding it. And that's a problem, right? Because it's complex. It's not a simple thing. And most people at this point, after the OJ trial, which I think was the first one to use DNA in it, people just take, although he was acquitted, let's be fair, right? It was not proven, beyond a reasonable doubt. So people just take for granted that DNA is like the gold standard, and that all DNA is equal, and they don't think about it beyond that, which I get. If you're not interested in this kind of thing, why would you, right? Or if you have your own issues going on, you can't, whatever. But I am interested in it, and there's a lot of people that are able to really look into it as I've looked into it. And so I feel like it's important for people to understand what I'm talking about, and then they can make their own choice. They can make their own judgment about it. So let's talk about the Bryan Kohberger case. I just wanted to kind of, the first question I really came up with was like, my issue is this: why did they not test, or why do we not know these unknown samples, right? It's A, B, C, D. Why were none of these things pursued? It turns out at least 3 of them, I believe, and I'm going to show you where I found that, were run through CODIS. So, okay, so they ran them through CODIS. They found running these things through CODIS a necessary step. But we don't know if they hit in CODIS, and we also don't know after CODIS what was done with that. Was it just like placed in a file somewhere, or deemed not important? Were those people that they ran through CODIS, was one of them somebody that they knew? What was the investigative process on those 3 people, right? What about those 3 people? And I thought, there's no way that happened, right? There's no way that they went ahead and just ignored all that, right? There's no way they ignored it. They had to have worked it up and come to some kind of conclusion. So sorry about that, guys. All right. So I just found it incredulous that these things weren't worked up. And you know what? There's probably a reason, I'll hear about it, that sometimes they don't work these things up. Those reasons could be it was degraded, it was partial, it was this, it was that. But so was Bryan Kohberger's. Allegedly, so was the touch DNA from the knife sheath. It was degraded and partial. So that's not a good reason. So it's a red flag, right? So let's just look at this for a second. I'm just going to share this here. Oh, it's right here. Okay. All right. So this is the sealed hearing, and this is Ann Taylor questioning Brett Payne. When was the first time you heard Bryan Kohberger's name? First time I heard Bryan Kohberger's name was December 19th, 2022. And what was that a result of? That was a result of investigative genetic genealogy that was being undertaken by the FBI. We had a phone call that evening and we were told Bryan Kohberger's name. And before that, Mr. Kohberger was not on your radar. No. So before December 19th, the lead investigator from Moscow Police Department, that is the lead in this investigation, had not heard the name Bryan Kohberger. Okay, so up here, oops, sorry, I just want to scooch down here a little bit more. So he's talking about the cameras that he looked at. So she says, with those references in mind and keeping December 19th in mind, which of those cameras were your focus before you learned Bryan Kohberger's name? He said, all of them. And it was later that other cameras became important. Is that right? He says, those were the main ones we relied upon for vehicles. In particular is what those ones were. Then she says, so, I mean, that's not, I don't think that's necessarily like a bad thing, right? Because the cameras were all just cameras around the neighborhood. So they were going to be important no matter what. It's just that after they learned Bryan Kohberger's name, they then obviously knew where he lived. So those cameras then became important. But they hadn't found those cameras prior to getting his name. I think that's important to understand. Okay. I'm going to return to that in just a minute. All right. Did you interview any people in relation to the case before December 19th? Yes. And other officers did? Yes. Did you interview the roommates? Yes. Did you review officers' work? Yes. They had regular meetings. Did you have any role in deciding to pursue IGG? Yes. It was collaborative decision amongst the command team. So I guess that's Moscow Police Department command team. Were you aware that Othram Labs began the work on IGG? Yes. He doesn't remember, though, what was received from Othram directly. I think that's a problem. He's the lead investigator. This is the most important piece of information or evidence from the crime scene. And he doesn't know what type of work Othram was doing. That's a problem. He received some documents. He doesn't remember. Then he discussed taking that. He was part of that decision to go to the FBI. This is his first encounter with IGG. It was collaborative, which means he didn't come up with that idea. Somebody else in the Moscow Police Department or the prosecutor's office came up with the idea to send to Othram and then to send to FBI. He's saying the only thing the FBI had was more databases. The FBI only has more databases because they're willing to go into the ones that they shouldn't be going into, which are against their policy. So this one. Do you know what files or documents went to the FBI from Othram? I don't remember. All right, let's just see here. Hold on. The only thing that was given to us was Bryan Kohberger's name. That was it. It was fed to us by the FBI. That it has to be taken as no more than a tip, and that was it. So once we received his name, we set about doing, basically they did their regular investigation. Like they looked him up in DMV, they looked him up in some criminal database, they looked him up in they probably ran his credit and stuff like that. She says, do you know why the FBI connected Bryan Kohberger to the case? He didn't know. And then he says the next day that they had a secondary meeting with the FBI and they were walked through the family tree and how they did it. And he says, I don't remember the details. It was an in-depth conversation that, to be honest, is above my head. So basically, he doesn't know how the fuck the FBI utilized IGG. He doesn't know the first thing about it. I bet you I know more about it than he does. I bet you a lot of people that study this case do. And I think that's a big problem, again, because he's the lead investigator. And this is the most critical piece of evidence. And he doesn't know how a name came from that piece of evidence. It's just like a magical for him. It's just like something magical that happens, and he's willing to accept it without understanding it. That is a major problem for a lot of reasons. One, because he's the one that is going to use this lead. I get it. Sometimes you don't know where leads come from. That's fair. That's different, though, when it's like more circumstantial type stuff or looking into somebody. But this is about the DNA. This DNA is not a regular lead. It is not a regular tip. This DNA has come from genetic witnesses that did not volunteer to be witnesses. In fact, some of them may not have wanted to be witnesses. They didn't have any evidence linking Kohberger, apparently. So, okay. So it's your understanding that the FBI's work said that it was Bryan Kohberger's DNA on the sheath? That's not my understanding. Then what is? My understanding is the FBI concluded that Bryan Kohberger was a possible source of DNA that we should look into. They did not, to my knowledge, at any point say Bryan Kohberger's DNA is on the sheath. Okay. On December 20th, what that happened when somebody you should look into, what did you do? Okay, the DMV, the NCIC, TLO credit-based. They find out, lo and behold, like they really don't have anything. He doesn't have a criminal history. They don't really have anything. And then down here, this part right here is really interesting, right? So they pursued some interview surveillance camera. They pursued evidence found inside the scene. And then she slams them with this one. I love it. What efforts did you make to pursue unknown male B? Bam, right between the eyes. Of course, he says you have to be more specific because now he's got to be real careful. He's got to parse his words now. I don't remember exactly where unknown male B came from. If I told you the lab report, Ann says, if I told you the lab report showed unknown male B came from a blood spot on the handrail going between the second and the first floor, does that help jog your memory? Yes, ma'am. Why did you not pursue that person? And he says, at that point in time, we had already received Kohberger's name. And from what my understanding was, entering another DNA profile into CODIS would remove the previous one we had from the knife sheath. So we just decided, quote, we'll stay with the one from the knife sheath. And if we need to, we can address the unknown male B at a later time. She said she makes a point to clarify this. Were you not aware of unknown male B until after December 19th? And he clarifies it too. No, ma'am. He was aware of it before December 19th. And then she slams him again. Well, how about unknown male D? Again, more specific. So she says, okay, this was blood on a glove outside the house. I want to back up and talk about the affidavits. Okay, wait. And she just says, yes, ma'am. All right. So let's just debunk one thing that he says right here. This bullshit that everybody kind of caught and thought, is that even true? I think I even heard like an attorney be like, is that even true? Like, why would somebody know unless this is their line of business? But I looked it up. And it turns out I asked my AI. A detective said in court he didn't upload a second DNA sample because it would remove the previous sample profile. Does that make sense? And my AI said the detective statement does not make sense in the context of how DNA profiles are managed in CODIS. CODIS allows for multiple DNA profiles from different samples to be stored in the system. Uploading a new profile does not remove or overwrite existing profiles. Each DNA that is associated with specific case information, allowing for comprehensive searches across the database without losing previous data. I mean, the integrity of the database is maintained by ensuring that new entries do not affect existing profiles. Each entry is treated independently. This detective may misunderstand the process or the implications of entering multiple samples, or maybe this detective is full of shit, or maybe this detective can't tell when somebody is shoveling him shit. I'm not sure which, but this is a problem, right? So this is where my first problem starts, like right off the bat. You're the lead detective and you can't tell me any good reason why you chose to upload that DNA, that touch DNA no less, which is a couple of skin cells. You can't tell me why you chose that, and yet you didn't choose to follow through with the others. If you can't remember, other than to say it would kick out the other profile, which is bullshit, then it sounds like you were told not to remember, or you're hiding something. Because you should know exactly what you did with that. You should know exactly why you didn't run it through and what happened with it. You should know exactly why. And the fact that you don't remember and then give a lie as an excuse as why you didn't do it is highly concerning. And the fact that the judge doesn't care about this and makes it seem like that's okay is highly concerning. Should they get the trial dismissed over it? No, I don't think that would happen, but they should at least have something, a sanction, something needs to be done, because this is just like the Karen Reed investigation and just like the Richard Allen or the Delphi investigation. The police work is horrible. Okay, so that's a big red flag for me. It's a big one. And I know it's a big red flag for a lot of people. So the other thing he talks about in here is how this affidavit is a living document. He started about 2 weeks prior to ever hearing Bryan Kohberger's name. And she said, well, what did it look like prior to Bryan? And he says, the crime scene and the roommate testimony. What came after they knew about Bryan was the map of the car and the cell data. Prior, the affidavit had nothing to do with Bryan and had nothing to do with that white car. They also added in the affidavit, you remember, his police stops, as if anybody cares about the police stops. One of them's been hidden from us. I don't know what possibly it can be. But it wasn't anything that landed him in jail or even I don't even think he got a fine for it. I think I looked it up and it was dismissed or something. It was something like a nothing burger, but we can't see it for some reason. And then the one that we did see, where he was basically just being very, very specific with his understanding of driving through a stop sign because he doesn't have crosswalks in Pennsylvania. That one was nothing. That was a nothing burger too. Like, I don't understand why that's in an affidavit. I don't understand that. Nothing happened there. Nobody got hurt. Nobody got arrested. I don't even know if he got a ticket, maybe just a citation. I'm not even sure. So it does turn out, though, apparently, that the DNA from these men or these unknowns, they were eventually uploaded into CODIS. I don't know when. I think I actually do know when. But they were uploaded into CODIS. So then the next question would be, okay, they were uploaded in CODIS. Did anybody match? And if they didn't, what did you do then? Did you also pursue IgG with them too? Because that's a lot. And I think it's equally important to the knife sheath. So let's just take a look at this for a second. So this is the affidavit from Bicca Barlow. From the discovery in this case, it appears that at least 3 and possibly 4 profiles were uploaded to the CODIS database prior to Mr. Kohberger being charged. Mr. Kohberger has requested the discovery of these uploads and any resulting hits or candidate matches to these unknown male profiles, even if the lab has dispositioned them as non-candidate matches. So Bicca Barlow has reviewed the discovery and is letting us know that 3, if not 4, profiles were uploaded to the CODIS database prior to Kohberger being arrested. And we know that Detective Payne said that prior to the 19th, he didn't have Bryan Kohberger's name. And we know that he said that these were not put through any workup because they had the knife sheath. And he thought that if you put in another profile in the CODIS machine, it would go boom, which is a lie. Or he's ignorant. Both are inexcusable. So she goes into some more stuff, which is really interesting, and you should take a look if you're interested in Bicca Barlow. This affidavit is excellent. All right, and then next. This is from Jay Logston, and he has a really good argument here. He talks about a case in the New Jersey Superior Court, State versus Arteaga. In this case, an appellate court heard similar arguments about the need for software used for facial recognition to be discovered to the defendant, though they would not be admitted at trial. And here is a notation from that case. We are keenly aware the cases we have discussed involve instances concerning Fry hearings and potential expert testimony, and that here we are dealing instead with eyewitnesses who have already identified the perpetrator and the identification found admissible under Wade. However, the facts of this case convince us the defendant will be deprived of due process if he does not have access to the raw materials integral to the building of an effective defense. Well, they should use this one in Karen Reed too, but anyway. The evidence sought here is directly tied to the defense's ability to test. This is the key part right here. The evidence sought here is directly tied to the defense's ability to test the reliability of this facial recognition software. Okay. As such, it is vital to impeach the witness's identification, challenge the state's investigation, and create reasonable doubt and demonstrate third-party guilt. And if you just consider, just substitute FRT for IgG. That's why he put this here, because it's a similar thing where it's this advanced technology that's being used that's new. And nobody really knows like how accurate it is, or should we allow this into court? Shouldn't they have an evidentiary meeting about this IgG or this FRT? So they're saying the evidence sought here is directly tied to the defense's ability to test the reliability of the FRT. That's what the defense is trying to do in the Bryan Kohberger case. They're trying to test the reliability of the IgG, and they are not being allowed to do so because they are hiding their work. Ashley Jennings gave this really, I think, sarcastic, really, but also shitty like profile of how it happened. And it was literally like 4 arrows in a box. This shit was way more complicated. And honestly, I'm curious how regimented it is, or if it's just like throw spaghetti at a wall, because it feels like it's probably just throw spaghetti at a wall. And the defense should be allowed to test the reliability of throwing spaghetti at a wall. As such, it is vital to impeach the witness's ID and challenge the state's investigation. Yeah. So the FRT's reliability has obvious implications for the accuracy of the ID process, because an array constructed around a mistaken potential match would leave the witness with no actual perpetrator to choose. The reliability of the technology bears direct relevance to the quality and thoroughness of the broader criminal investigation, and whether the potential matches the software returned yielded any other viable alternative suspects. This would help establish third-party guilt, right? The defendant requests for the identity, design, specifications, and operation of the program be used for analysis. This is why Othram, another reason why I believe Othram didn't get the name, because if it was a company, it would have been a lot easier to go after them in court and say, this company must produce this information, right? But when it's the FBI, you're kind of fucked. And I'm sure that's part of this as well, that the FBI ended up doing some of this work, or making it seem as if they did the bulk of this work. Othram, they should be able to call Othram into the courtroom. I was just looking recently, and apparently David Middleman was called into a trial recently about genetic DNA. So they should have been able to call him in to ask him specifically. I don't know. Did they? I don't remember. At trial, the state will likely have the investigating officer explain the police investigation, including the process of retrieving the still photo. Okay. So here it says, all right, although we do not speculate regarding the exact nature of this testimony and whether defendant will seek to impeach it, the fact the state does not bear the burden of adducing testimony regarding the composition of the photo array does not bar the defense access to the discovery sought. Exactly. I want to see that there was one other thing where it says here. Yeah, it was ruled in their favor, basically. that it was vital to impeach the witness. So New Jersey has this precedent. So we have that going for us over here in the great state of New Jersey. All right. And now let's just talk about where it began. Because this thing, we could go on for hours about this IGG. And I think it's a problem. I think it's a big problem because it's not standardized. It's very new. And they're just winging it. And they're taking liberties. They're taking a liberty that you don't need a warrant. Look, it doesn't even have to be a Fourth Amendment issue. How about just you need a warrant from a judge if you're going to break a policy? If you're going to break a policy, right? If you're going to break a policy, sorry about that. If you're going to break a policy, right? I feel like that's just an automatic, like, we need to check in with the judge. I feel like that should just be an automatic. That's number one. Number two, if you're going to look in a database that holds people's DNA, which is like, I don't know how you can get more private. I feel like you should need a warrant for that. Because you're just looking in a database with people's DNA. The fact that they didn't need a warrant for that is a major fucking red flag, a major fucking problem. I get it. It's been happening. There's no law against it, apparently. But what about, ethically? What about morally? Right? What about those questions? That's how these laws come out to be, because of what people think is right and wrong, right? What people think is bad and good, what people think is ethical, what people think shows truth and integrity, right? So what do you think people think about that, about having their DNA used? Well, it turns out people don't really like it. About 60% of people, when they were polled, said that they would not like their DNA to be used for law enforcement or research purposes. So what that tells me is more people need to be made aware of what's going on in this case. And so I'm going to keep talking about that because I think it's a big issue. So let's look at this here. The Marshall Project. And this is titled, this is actually a really good article, Framed for Murder by His Own DNA. This was in 2018. Lucas Anderson. They charged him with a brutal crime he did not commit. Okay. When the DNA results came back, even Lucas Anderson thought he might have committed murder. I drink a lot. Maybe I did do it. His lawyer told him to be quiet, but she agreed. It looked bad. Before he was charged with murder, Anderson was a 26-year-old homeless alcoholic with a long rap sheet. Around midnight, November 29, 2012, a group of men had broken into Kumra's 7,000 square foot mansion. They found him watching CNN. They tied him up. They blindfolded him. They basically did a Clockwork Orange, it looks like. The men left. A paramedic declared the guy dead. Okay, 3.5 weeks later, the police arrest Anderson. His DNA had been found on Ravish's fingernails. They believed the men struggled as Anderson tied up his victim. They charged him with murder, and Kulik was appointed to the case, and they looked at the DNA results. Anderson tried to make sense of a crime he had no memory of committing. Now, granted, we don't know if Bryan Kohberger is saying to Anne and Eliza or anyone else, I don't know what you're talking about. I do not remember this, right? But even this guy here, who we now know has been fully exonerated, said, I don't know, maybe I did it. You see how easy it is to start doubting yourself? And this guy wasn't kept in like solitary in some prison in Indiana for months. Then he says, nah, I don't do things like that. But maybe I did, right? It took months for them to figure it out. Lucas Anderson's DNA had found its way onto the fingernails of a dead man that he had never met. And I really hope I'm sure they're going to bring this case up to the jury. I wonder if Becca Barlow is probably involved in this too. I mean, and I've heard of this case before, but there was some more information here I wanted to point out. DNA forensic analysis was in its infancy in the 80s, right? Crime labs needed a speck of body fluid, usually blood, semen, or spit, to generate the profile. That changed in 97 when Australian forensic scientist Roland von Oerschot stunned the criminal justice world with a 9-paragraph paper titled DNA Fingerprints from Fingerprints. It revealed that DNA could be detected not just from bodily fluids, but from traces left by a touch. So that's when 1997, that's when this, quote, touch DNA came out. It's DNA fingerprints from fingerprints, okay? Investigators across the globe began scouring crime scenes for anything, a doorknob, a countertop, a knife handle, that a perpetrator may have tainted with incriminating touch DNA. So prior to 1997, they weren't able to use this process on fingerprints. Van Oerschot's paper also contained a vital observation, and this happens in medicine all the time. And here we see it happening in the legal system. Some people's DNA appeared on things that they had never touched. It's like the drug that gets approved for use in a select group of people, and then everybody starts prescribing the drug because they forgot there's a black box warning that says, don't prescribe it to this group because it could kill them. And then a bunch of people start dying, and then the drug either gets withdrawn from the market, or nowadays it just keeps getting prescribed, and the pharmaceutical company just keeps paying people out. I mean, this is what happens. People ignore the good stuff, the important stuff. The important stuff here is, yes, you can do that shit, but some people's DNA appear on things that they never touched. So when people say to me, well, I think Bryan Kohberger is guilty, and I don't see how you could think he's innocent or not guilty because his DNA was at the crime scene, I say to them that his fingerprint DNA was at a crime scene, and that some people have DNA appearing on things that they never touched, including a man who was being looked at for the murder of someone he had never met, simply because earlier a paramedic contacted this man and contacted the other man. That's insane. That shit happened. It's real and it happened, so you can't deny it. In the years since, Van Oerschot's lab has been one of the few. Again, it's just like with vaccine side effects and drug side effects and everything else. Nobody wants to look into this to show you there's a problem here. Yes, you can use it, but be careful with it. Educate the public about the fact that it's not a gold standard. It's not always perfect. In the years, okay, so he's one of the few to investigate this phenomenon dubbed secondary transfer. What they have learned is that once it's out in the world, DNA doesn't always stay put. In one of Van Oerschot's experiments, for instance, volunteers sat at a table and shared a jug of juice. After 20 minutes of chatting and sipping, swabs were deployed on their hands, the chairs, the table, the jug, and the juice glasses, then tested for genetic material. So all these people are hanging out, around the table, chatting it up, all this stuff, right? So then afterwards, they're testing all of these things for genetic material. The jug was touched by each of the participants at least once, and each of their DNA was found on the handle in almost every case. Okay, perfect. That makes sense, right? Everybody at that table did take that jug and probably poured some water for themselves. And guess what? They found out that all their DNA was on the handle. Perfect. Although the volunteers never touched each other, 1/3 of the volunteers wound up with another's DNA on their palm. 1/3 of the glasses had DNA of volunteers who did not touch or drink from them. Let's just look at that one more time to fully understand this, okay? All the people out there that want to convict Bryan Kohberger because of his touch DNA. In the green to the right here are objects that have DNA of a participant who never touched them. So all these people are sitting around a table. They test, the control test, the DNA on the jug. Everybody's DNA is on the handle. But then they test everything else and they find that 36% of these people that sat around that table had DNA on a chair, and none of those people, 36% that had the DNA on the chair, had never touched that chair. 40% had it on the table, had never touched that table. 33% had it on glasses that had never touched the glass. And 33% of people had the DNA of others on their palm that they did not touch. Okay? So how accurate is this DNA? Well, I mean, it's 60% of the time. Now, I don't know how big this sample was, but if it's published, I imagine that the N number is high enough. Look at this, though. So what does it really even mean if someone has touched DNA on a knife sheath snap? Well, it could mean a lot if you have a lot of corroborating evidence, not circumstantial, corroborating evidence. For example, there's GPS that gives Bryan's location in front of that house for 14 minutes during the specified time frame, right? That's corroborating. Or there are notes written in a journal from Bryan Kohberger discussing how he can't stand these college kids who drink all the time and aren't serious about life, right? Or you find some manifesto from Bryan, or you look into Bryan's history and he's had violent assaults against women on several occasions with a knife, right? And then you tell me that would bother me, all those things, but it'd be tough to convict on that, you know. But then you tell me his touch DNA is on a knife sheath. That helps me now. Okay, now I think he could be guilty. But in this case, you don't have any corroborating evidence that Bryan Kohberger has shit to do with this. In which case, this touch DNA is fucking meaningless. And anyone who says that it's not is gaslighting. They're gaslighting. They're either gaslighting or they're ignorant. Now, if they're on TV and they're a judge or an attorney or some respected journalist, and they're telling you that the touch DNA is super important and it's the whole whatever, right? Well, then they're gaslighting. Because touch DNA ain't shit when you look at it like this. Then there was the foreign DNA profiles that didn't match any of the juice drinkers. It turned up on half of the chairs and glasses and all over the participants' hands and tables. So now not only, this is crazy. Okay, look at that. This is insane right here. The blue line here are objects that have DNA from people that aren't there, that they don't even know. It's just foreign human DNA that didn't match any participants. So not only is your DNA in this group getting passed around all over the place, even to people you never touched, places you never sat, drinks you never drank. Now you've got 57% of the chairs have foreign DNA, and 97% of the table. 47% of the glass, 74% of the hands. Now, it makes sense, right? Because unless they just opened up that table fresh from the factory, other people have probably touched it. Same with these other things, including your own hand, right? But the reason why it's important is this demonstrates that you don't know the timing of it. So in other words, these people that are bearing foreign DNA that don't match anyone, at some point they were likely there, right? Now, we don't really know that. Maybe somebody they know was there. But maybe if you corroborate that their table, chair, glass, and hand all correlate, that might be more supportive. But this actually just really highlights the fact that you don't know when that shit got there. You just don't. That's another reason why touch DNA is bullshit. The only explanation, the participants unwittingly brought with them alien genes, perhaps from the lover they kissed that morning, the stranger with whom they had shared a bus grip, or the barista who handed them their afternoon latte. Okay, so this makes me believe that they must have, like, I bet you they cleaned all this stuff. So if they cleaned all this stuff and it has this much percentage of foreign DNA, more DNA than is actually of the people there, then this shows you how easily you can transport genes, how your genes are going to end up on a table somewhere of someone you passed by at the bus stop or got a coffee from at Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks. It's going to end up in a table at a crime scene, and you're not going to know why. But it doesn't matter, because then you're going to have that, even though it doesn't hit in CODIS, it's going to be worked up, and they're going to connect you through some ancestors of yours that you've never met, and these people didn't agree to be helpful. In fact, maybe agreed not to be helpful. And then that's going to be it. That's going to be the nail in your fucking coffin. And that could be exactly what's going on right here. And in fact, I think that's exactly what's going on right here, because nothing else makes sense. In a sense, this isn't surprising. We have a trail of ourselves. Oh, everywhere we go. An average person sheds up to 50 million skin cells a day. To find out the prevalence of DNA in the world, a group of Dutch researchers tested 105 public items: escalator rails, public toilet door handles, shopping basket handles, coins. 91% bore human DNA, sometimes from half a dozen people. Even items intimate to us, the armpits of our shirts, say, can bear other people's DNA they found. How much other DNA is on that knife sheath? How much other DNA is on there? Just Bryan's? I feel like I read somewhere it was a mixture. The itinerant nature of DNA has serious implications for forensic investigations. If traces of our DNA can make their way to a crime scene we never visited, aren't we all possible suspects? Yes. Fucking yes. Bingo. Forensic DNA has other flaws. Complex mixtures of many DNA profiles can be interpreted wrongly. Certainty statistics are often wildly miscalculated, as we see in this case. And DNA analysis robots have sometimes been stretched past the limits of their sensitivity. So there you go. We have DNA analysis robots. Did you know that? And they're sensitive. I know what they're saying here. It's just the sensitivity of their testing. But okay, does the detective Payne know that they're DNA analysis robots that help with this shit? As advances in technology are solving some of these problems, they have actually made the problem of DNA transfer worse. And each new generation of forensic tool is more sensitive. Labs today can identify people with DNA from just a handful of cells that easily migrate. A survey of published science, interviews with leading scientists, and a review of thousands of pages of court and police documents associated with the Coomer case has elucidated how secondary DNA transfer can undermine the credibility of the criminal justice system's most trusted tool. And yet very few crime labs worldwide regularly and robustly study secondary DNA transfer. Of course, they don't. Why would they? Because they're in the business of prosecuting people. Let's not complicate it with the truth. It's partly because most forensic scientists believe DNA to be the least of their field's problems. They're not wrong. DNA is the most accurate forensic science we have. It has exonerated scores of people convicted. Okay, so this is interesting. It's true. What they're saying is, and this is a good point, forensic scientists may not speak up about this a lot because they're afraid that if they do, they won't be able to utilize that favorable um that trustworthy outlook that DNA has to exonerate people, right? They're worried that they'll get the bite back on both sides, right? And that makes sense, but I don't see it that way, and I think the public wouldn't see it that way either if you gave them the chance, if you educated them on it. Like most human enterprises, DNA analysis is not perfect, and without study, the scope and impact of that imperfection is difficult to assess. And this is exactly what Ann Taylor and Liza Mazoth are trying to argue to the court, that this is not settled. This is not settled science here. It's not even close to settled science, and it's not been litigated either. This British forensic researcher, Peter Gill, has little doubt that his field, so often credited with solving crimes, is also responsible for wrongful convictions. For every miscarriage of justice that is detected, there must be a dozen that are never discovered. And I totally believe this, and it's a lot. It's really a lot. But this guy ended up having a great alibi. He was actually, I guess, in a hospital or in an ambulance or something. And so they didn't prosecute him. See, Bryan Kohberger's problem is he has never a great alibi that we know of. The men who killed the actual killers wore latex gloves, and a pile of them were left in the kitchen sink, wet and soapy. That's crazy. That guy's got under his fingernails. It's just, I mean, it makes sense. So this goes more into this case, and thank God this guy was exonerated. But it took a long time. So it's a really good case to look into and see, and it's the same kind of thing. Like even this guy, when he has like a solid alibi, people just don't want to believe it. Well, your DNA is under his fingernails. Your DNA is under his fingernails, so you must have been there. Your DNA is on the knife sheath. Your DNA is on the knife sheath, so you must have been there. This has been one gaslight after another in this case. And so I think the reason why people get passionate about it and then why people go at each other so much about it is the people who believe in his innocence, or at least who believe that this was a false arrest, are painfully aware at the details that I just went through and are willing to accept them, not willing to overlook them, willing to look them right in the eye and say, this is a bad setup for Bryan and all of us. And we don't like it because it offends our sense of justice. We're not even getting to the point of the victims yet. Of course, the victims deserve justice. To suggest that's not what's sought here is just, you're just straw manning the argument. You don't have an argument, so you're making a stupid one. So this is why people get angry about it. And then the people on the other side, they just don't want to hear it because they're so bloodthirsty. They're so bloodthirsty for someone to be shot and killed that they've already decided this person is guilty and doesn't deserve any benefit of the doubt, which all defendants do, by the way, but we don't tend to look at a lot of them. We really don't. So we're looking at this one because this one is so outrageous. It's just the right mix to come to the public forefront. And I think people should continue to speak about this, to speak about the gaslighting in this case, to speak about how there's no evidence that is really to be trusted. It's not even that. There's just no evidence. The touch DNA is meaningless when you have nothing else. They didn't even know who Bryan Kohberger was until December 19th. They didn't add the car footage and the cell phone data until after they got his name. Now they're just operating on a confirmation bias. There were other people. There were even 4 brothers that Othram came up with. What did they do with those people? What did they do with those people? You'd have to argue that Bryan's DNA was planted on a sheath. There's enough reasonable doubt already in this case because it's the only thing that ties him to this. Go and look at some old commentators about all the DNA evidence they were going to find in his car, in his apartment, and all over, everywhere. And there was none, not one fucking speck. Nobody is that careful. Not even like special forces from the government can be that careful. Nobody. It's impossible. It's impossible for him to have committed that crime. And the only thing that's tied to him is a touch DNA on a button snap. It's impossible. You tell me how that's possible. Has it ever been done? Have you heard about a case where that's been done? 50 million skin cells are shedding. So yeah, I feel like people who want to shut people like me or anybody who is discussing the fact that this is a railroad job up are people who don't respect the First Amendment, that are not interested in broadening perspectives. That's how I see that. I believe they have every right to continue to say what they're saying, but spending time insulting people or picking them apart or whatever, I mean, that's just not a serious person, and I wouldn't take those people seriously. I don't take those people seriously. They have some sort of agenda, perhaps, or maybe they're just really angry and like to see people, wrongfully prosecuted. I don't know. It's fucking weird. I can't get it. So anyway, there's some more stuff I want to talk about with this, but for now, I think it's good. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was informative. But yeah, this DNA is some serious bullshit. So let's just peace out with some music. Here we go. Bye, guys. Have a good night. Don't be a genetic witness.